the food that has been created is biologically working against you because it's hyper palatable, right? Even the foods that seem more natural, like we know that a Dorito is a hyper palatable food. It takes corn, which isn't like the corn that's grown in the fields, like, flowing in the wind that we think of, but it's corn that is then chemically broken down so that it is just individual little molecules and then turned into a paste and then removed all the nutrients and then formed into this little chip that then has oil and salt on it. And now it is, and then we have flavorings and MSGs and all of the other things on top of it. It is a food-like substance. But some of the other items have also evolved. So the chicken breasts, they are huge, right? Like our chicken breasts are so much bigger than they used to be. They're also really adjusted from what is maybe the natural version of what a chicken just living out in the wild looks like. Same with our apples. They're 100 times sweeter than they used to be. So not saying these things to make it feel like we can't eat anything, but just that it's a true fact that our current food system is working against what our current biological body function as. And then similarly with the movement and energy expenditure, our bodies want us to be lazy. They are designed so that we don't want to expend energy, right? It's like save your energy unless you need it. But now we literally don't need to move. We can sit on our couch, work from our couch, literally with our laptops on our laps. We can order our groceries. We can adjust the AC from our phone. We can call our friends from the phone. So if we wanted to sit all day, probably for those who don't have kids, but sit all day on the couch, then you could, right? You don't have to move if you don't want to. So we have a lot working against us. And I think that's where we need to have some empathy for how hard it is actually to do these healthy behaviors. I think becomes a lot of judgment at you're not disciplined enough, or how come you can't stick with the goals that you know are right for you, or why did you binge on those Doritos? Don't you know those are bad for you foods? Like that's not helpful because it is genuinely hard to stick with these things, which is why I think we need to support ourselves with the more tools in the toolbox to make it easier to achieve these things, the better. And that's where I think technology can really help you just be more successful. So it's not about using it as a crutch. It's helping you, it's a tool in the toolbox.
Yeah, there's a picture of it on the screen right now. It's really fascinating. It's this little micro wire sensor that goes in your body. You stick it on, it's waterproof. And it literally, data-wise, tracks your blood sugar. I mean, it feels like the Jetsons, like science fiction, doesn't it? Are you ever just like, oh my gosh, I can't even believe this technology exists. It's so fascinating. I was introduced to your world by Rob Wolf, and he did Wired to Eat, which was a phenomenal book. Everyone needs to read this book. And he opened up my mind to CGM. And then that's when I found NutriSense. And I have to tell you, I didn't really believe it at first glance. Like, is this real? Can it actually help me? I was completely floored. A potato versus rice. A potato for me spiked me like 25 milligrams per deciliter more, sometimes even 50 if I ate that with another sugar source or carb source compared to rice. So, and we've all heard about the Chris Kresser method where you boil the potatoes and you let them cool and it's supposed to lower the glycemic index. It didn't work for me, y'all. Like the only way I could have known this, truly hands down, the only way I could have known that rice was actually a better choice for me than a potato was by seeing the data. Otherwise, I was just going anecdotally off of how I feel, right? And I think this is a really, really beautiful way that we can be more mindful because people may be, quote, eating healthy, Kara, following their neighbor's plan, following their daughter's plan, following a PDF that they got online, doing carnivore, whatever. And like you said, it's not that we want to harp on people. It's about giving people better resources so they can make better choices, so they can be more in tune with themselves. I would have never known that a potato would spike me way more than rice. I just assumed that they were fairly equal. Have you found something like that for yourself? Like what shocked you in your own experiments? I know you don't eat Doritos, but like, was it a smoothie? Was it rice? Like what was one food that your CGM showed you was probably not the best choice for you?
Yeah. And I actually have an example that is always top of mind of the opposite of a food I thought was maybe worse for me and ended up being perfectly fine, which was bananas. Like everyone's like, bananas are the highest glycemic index fruit. I mean, which is true. That's a fact, but that's at a population level. Yeah. And they have fiber. And to your point is everyone is a unique individual. And what we have seen is that people have different responses to foods. So you might respond, better or worse to potatoes than rice, where somebody else might have the complete opposite response. We're this unique individual because of our genetics, epigenetics, microbiome, all of these factors. But for me, for whatever reason, I have barely any glucose increase at all to bananas. And it's higher for other fruit like strawberries or apples. So understanding that, where it's like, I really like bananas, but I really felt like I had to limit them to, just certain times or just certain portion sizes. But now I realize that's not true. I can have them and it's not a big deal and I enjoy them. And so that also enhances my pleasure with food, which is an important part. You still want to enjoy the food that you're eating. Whereas other things, like you said, for me, sweet potatoes bring my glucose really high, but I don't really like them. I always ate them because they're like the healthier potato choice, but white potatoes, I actually respond better to. And I'm like, great, because I don't really care about sweet potatoes that much either. So learning those things can help you make more mindful decisions. And it might be that you have a higher glucose response and it's your favorite food in the whole world. So we would never, ever recommend that you stop eating it for the rest of your life. So instead, it's now having more mindfulness around, okay, this is a food that brings my glucose up more. So maybe it's more of a special occasion food rather than a daily food. And I'm mindfully making that choice that I'm okay with the fact that it raises my glucose higher, but I'm not going to eat rice, which also raises my glucose high. And I don't even really like rice. So it's being able to make those personal trade-offs and decisions and kind of educated choices that are unique to you and your preferences and how you're responding. And that actually empowers people. Like that's the word that we're always trying to go for. We're not trying to tell you what to do. We're not trying to create a restrictive diet for you. We're trying to empower you with information so that you can make better decisions, which leads to hopefully better outcomes in the long term and a more sustainable plan, right? When we are given this prescriptive eat keto and only do this thing and follow this exact thing, it's really hard for a lot of people to actually stick to that long term. But when you see this is my data and this is how my body responds, it's much more meaningful and it's a lot more sticky. So when people see that, it's a lot easier to be like, nah, I don't really I'm going to skip the rice because I know what it does to my glucose, and not because your doctor told you don't eat rice, that's too glycemic. Like you have two totally different outcomes in those situations.
See, this is what's really fascinating to me too, is nutrient timing and glucose signaling dependent on physical load. And I remember when I was a personal trainer, I really didn't know anything about nutrition. I was just kind of faking it. And when I got to I trained people for 10 years. And when I got to the 7th or 8th year, I found Paul Chek's book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy. And he talked about food rotation, diet, and nutrient timing, and actually giving yourself the spike that you need before physical activity or after physical activity. And I was all about that because that flipped the script for me. I thought, wow, okay, so you actually can eat the majority of whatever carbs you want within moderation, as long as you time them for activity. If you love that video, you'll love the one on the screen right now. Click the one on the screen and enjoy.